Well, I didn't think you had it in you.
I'm your huckleberry.
Why, Johnny Ringo, you look like somebody just walked over your grave.
My name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? All right, and welcome back to another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. This week we are talking about the Wild West, the American frontier, all that good stuff. This is episode 71, I do believe. We're going to get into all that. Before we do, as normal, there is some housekeeping to get to. I want to let you know, as always, 7 days a week, you can find out how things happen over at hdthappen.com. You'll always find episode transcripts as well as pictures and videos for every episode. There's a blog on there as well. I haven't really gotten to it too much. I haven't been doing too much with the website. Definitely need to get back on that, but it's definitely there for all your viewing purposes. Just the last couple episodes I haven't been updating as well as I should. But yeah, what am I watching? I watched a couple things. What did I just watch? I watched this thing called Queen Cleopatra on Netflix, and it was really good, actually. And this is part of an African queen collection that they evidently have. I didn't know. But I watched the first two episodes. It's like a 3 or 4 episode thing. The last two I didn't really care about, but the first two, just kind of learning about who she was. I think it's pretty cool, and kind of learning about like who was running what during that time, which I think is something that I think gets left out sometimes when we talk about these different civilizations. It's like, you know, they were saying during that time, like the Romans were like running Egypt. Like it wasn't, not quite, but like basically like they were in debt to Rome, and like Julius Caesar would like roll up and like, you know, be like taking whatever he wants type stuff. But you never think about that when you're just thinking about like pharaohs and like pyramids and all that stuff. You're thinking, oh, it's just all the Egyptians. It's like, nah, man, it was still like an international world back then. But you learn a lot about her, but you also learn that we don't know much about her at the same time. Like they will like just straight up tell you like, this is what we think probably happened. It's like, cool. So like we're all just guessing, because I don't know, but it sounds like you don't either. But yeah, it was still pretty cool to just learn about her. I watched that. I kind of went back and started watching I Think You Should Leave again, by Tim Robinson, which is a sketch show, because the new season's coming out in a couple of weeks or so. And some other people were talking about it, and it made me think about like how funny it was. And so if you're looking for something that's just like, I don't know, just kind of turn your brain off and just kind of watch, you know, it's definitely worth watching. I could sit here and butcher his jokes and try to regurgitate the stuff that I've seen on there. It's just not worth it. What am I listening to? You know, I mean, honestly, at this point, I don't think I have anything that I'm right now that I'm listening to that you guys have that I haven't told you about. Yeah, I don't think so. So I guess I'll just go ahead and plug my mini-sode. Why not? Because you should be listening to that. It comes out every other week. You know, on Mondays at 4:30 in the same slot as How Did That Happen? Last week we did Caitlyn Jenner, and talked about her journey and transformation from Bruce Jenner to Caitlyn Jenner. I talked about how much I don't like Wheaties and how they're just not a good cereal for me. I love cereal, but not a Wheaties fan. But yeah, definitely check that out. We've done a bunch of people. That was episode 28, I think. Yeah, and so I mean, we're just still knocking them down. Honestly, and I think if you add them all up, we've been doing the mini-sode since like October. You add that with the How Did That Happen? This is like the 99th episode of all these together. It's pretty wild. It is really wild that this is episode 71 of How Did That Happen? I can't believe that we've gone this far, and that I've got a lot of things. You know, we're still going along. We're still chugging along. This should be a really good episode. I've learned a lot about the West and about the American frontier in general. But yeah, I don't think there's much else to say. Let's see, before we get on to our breaking old news segment, as always. Before we get to that, I mean, like and subscribe wherever you're listening to this. It always helps the pod grow. Give us 5 stars if you want to, and 2 stars if you don't want to. You can tell us why you don't want to give us 5 stars, because, you know, that's great. We'd love to know. Constructive criticism, as always, welcome. Yeah, I don't think there's much else to say, so let's get to the episode. All right, so for this So for this segment of breaking news, because I still haven't quite figured out exactly the parameters of this segment, I just really love the idea of reading off of old newspapers and just the stuff that they put in there that they thought was just necessary for the public to know. And so what I've got here is just, I'm going to read to you, what is this? This is the Huntsville Gazette from Huntsville, Alabama, right? This is the Saturday edition of the Huntsville Gazette, published June 18th, 1881. And the tagline for their newspaper is, "With charity for all and malice towards none." I don't know why that's necessary. This cost $1.50 for this specific copy. It's volume 11. But what I found interesting, because there's no pictures on this page. There's no pictures on this page. It's just all prose. But what they have is they have what's called a late news items. And I looked at that because I was like, I don't even know what that is. What is a late news item? Is it late in says that all of it happens at night? Is it late as in this is the last, like just before you guys printed it? Is it what makes it late? And the fact that you call them items is so general. We'll find out that is items is the best thing they could probably call it. So yeah, they just say it's just a catch-all. So the first thing they say here is a party of men took possession of the jail at Dover in Pope County in Arkansas on the 13th. And they hung Cal Emery, the wife murderer, whose death sentence Governor Churchill, a few weeks prior to that, had commuted to 21 years instead of death. So basically, the town did not like the decision that was handed down, and they took over the jail and hung this dude on their own. Vigilante justice. It said Emery resisted and was shot in the head, and then they hung him. It says here, it was supposed he was dead when hung. So, a group of people in Arkansas took over a jail and shot a dude and hung him. And that's only a paragraph in this newspaper. You feel like that's way more like a front page level topic here. And then it's got here, they just listing, it says, Mr. Clive Hersey, a well-known member of the Saldine Opera Company, committed suicide by jumping from a bridge into the river near Central City, Colorado. His matrimonial relations were unhappy. That's what they said. They are legit like diagnosing his suicide in the paper with one sentence. Oh, why did Clive jump? His matrimonial relations were unhappy. Next. Like, I think this is just wild that this is their segment. Maybe I'm alone in this. Maybe this is not intriguing or it blows nobody else's mind. But you wouldn't find this in today's newspaper. This is a newspaper from almost 150 years ago. It mentions here near Weston, Platte County, Missouri, a Negro named Charles Didell assaulted a young lady named Nancy Stillwell, and after a violent struggle, in order to shield himself from the discovery of his crime, he cut the victim's throat. He was discovered by two ladies passing by who gave the alarm. The villain fled, but was pursued and captured by a party of citizens forced to confess, and then hanged to a bridge by the brother of the victim. Once again, this is just in the newspaper. And the last one I have for you here, the last one. This is, I don't know. And I'm not, like I said, I still don't know where this segment is going, but as I continue to just read these old newspapers every couple weeks, it's hard not to just be like, wow. So James Mowbray, 9 years old, was arrested in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the other day for deliberately throwing a handful of unslaked lime into a little girl's eyes. I don't even know what unslaked lime is. Is it supposed to be slaked? Are you out here slaking your lime? I hope you guys are. I definitely am, if anybody's asking. All my lime is slaked, son. But yeah, he threw a handful of unslaked lime into a little girl's eyes. And the girl's screams attracted a crowd. When this happened, old James retreated into a neighboring lot, where it was said he coolly informed a companion that he had, quote-unquote, fixed that Irish girl. End quote. He did this because she was Irish. They don't mention his nationality or whatever his race is. We can all just take a guess. I don't know. I'm not saying we can all just, who knows? Who knows what James Mowbray looks like? But that's just wild that this is all from your Huntsville Gazette. And that's been another segment of Breaking Old News.
I don't think it's nice you laughing. You see, my mule don't like people laughing. It's the crazy idea you're laughing at him. Now, if you apologize like I know you're going to, I might convince him that you really didn't mean it.
Okay, so today we are here to talk about the Wild West. Sometimes called the Wild Wild West, sometimes called the Old West. I think it was originally known as the American frontier, right? It encompasses the geography, the history, the folklore, and the culture that's all kind of associated with the idea of American expansion in mainland North America. And that begins with the European colonial settlements that happened in the early 17th century and ends kind of around the early 1900s when we see kind of the last contiguous state join the Union. And we'll find, we'll get to it, but the main part that we know of as the Wild West was really only spanned about 45 years, maybe at a max. But as we normally do things here in this podcast, we got to go back before we can go forward. So we'll start with kind of the European contact in America after Christopher Columbus sailed his ocean blue, kind of around the early 17th century. Like I said, the first English settlers landed in New England in the 17th century, and they developed a concept of the Western frontier. The British Crown tried to keep the settlers east of the Appalachians to avoid conflict with France and or the Native Americans, and to prevent colonies from becoming too powerful. They wanted to kind of keep them kind of under their thumb. And so we see as the United States became more independent, more settlers wanted to move west. Basically, as time went on, people wanted to find out what else was out there. They moved on to states like Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio. Napoleon's France is actually one of the large things or one of the things that made the American West expand more is when we actually bought the Louisiana Territory, what's called the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, and that actually opened up for more expansion, like the Lewis and Clark Expedition. It's what made for people. It just sparked their further westward expansion. And in the 1830s, we get the idea of manifest destiny, which is the idea that the U.S. should expand all the way to the Pacific coast without regard for Indians or anybody else. It's basically the idea that America, because we were here, or I guess we weren't quite America yet, we were the American colony since we were America by that time. Excuse me, I stand corrected. Since we were America, we should just lay claim to anything that is just in our way between the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. And that is manifest destiny. That is what drives a lot of the westward expansion in America. So in the colonial era, before 1776, the West was of high priority for settlers, both settlers and politicians. And the actual first, like I said, the first real idea of what the American frontier would be the Jamestown settlement in Jamestown, Virginia in 1607. Like the idea of what we know as a frontier, like I said, will continue to expand. But from the moment they set foot on this country or in this continent, anything outside of their settlement then became the frontier, if you will. So like I said, during those early days, essentially the frontier was any part of the interior of the continent beyond the fringe of the existing settlements along the Atlantic coast. So, I mean, really, anything outside of Jamestown, anything in like Roanoke, like actual Roanoke, would consider to be still the frontier of America. And so basically, when we talk about the kind of the settling of America itself, or the American, and I mean that to say like the American land, not like the country. I guess so I can make sure we don't distinguish some things here. The continent of North America was settled by the English, the French, the Spanish, and the Dutch, and they had a number of different ways. They all kind of came at it differently. Only a few thousand French actually migrated to Canada to kind of start their colonization. And these inhabitants, these people, they settled in villages along the St. Lawrence River. And we'll actually find, I think, an interesting note that I know, or that I found, I'm not sure if it's in here, but in my notes it says like the last place in North America to be charted for maps was actually like the western side, like the Vancouver side above the Pacific Northwest. It was one of the last places. It had only been charted, I want to say maybe 230 years ago, which, might still seem like a long time when you think about the fact that, like Columbus, quote unquote, found the Americas. What are we talking now? 500 years ago? that only 200 to 230 years have we finished mapping the entire thing, to me seemed like a lot. You would have thought it had been done a lot earlier than that. But yeah, so back to the French and their they did a lot of fur trading throughout the Great Lakes in the Midwest of what would now become a bit of Canada and America. They didn't make a lot of long-term settlements during that time. The French settlements were limited to very small villages such as Kaskaskia, Illinois, as well as a larger settlement, of course, in New Orleans. In New York State, what was initially New York was a Dutch trading post set up on the Hudson River Valley, which was followed by large grants of land to rich landowning patroons who brought in tenant farmers who created compact, permanent villages. So one of the bigger things I feel like when I was doing the research I found was this thing called the Treaty of Fort Stanwix. I hope that's how you pronounce it. It certainly looks like that's how you pronounce it. And it was a treaty that was signed by the representatives of the Iroquois Nation as well as Great Britain. They were also accompanied by negotiators from New Jersey, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, and this all happened in 1768. Right? And it was negotiated mainly between Sir William Johnson and his deputy George Croghan, Croghan, and like I said, the representatives of the Iroquois. And what this really did, and why this I think is so important, is it established what's called a line of property. Now that sounds, you would think it's more than what it is, but it's basically just a line down, this part of the world or part of this continent that kind of followed the Ohio River, ceded the Kentucky portion of the Virginia colony to the British Crown, as well as most of what is now West Virginia. And this is important because to me, it kind of started the line of like saying, this is America right here. What we're doing, what will be America. It wasn't at that time, still not America. We wouldn't even go for our independence for like another 10 years, I want to say. Something like that. No, about another 20 years. Because what they say, we declared our independence in like 1787, I think. No, that's a lie. Hold on. We did it. Well, I get it. Because this is what always confused me. Little tangent here, just because we're talking about this time. I always thought that when they say 1776 was like when the war was over. I think I've covered this before, but I just want to put it out there because I never understood it. It was not when the war was over. It was when we declared independence. We would end up fighting that war for the next 11 years. I think it wasn't until 1787, check your notes, that we actually became an independent nation. That's when we actually got the president of America, who was George Washington. I said that for no real reason other than just to get out of my head. But back to this Treaty of Fort Stanwix, that's what kind of creates the first line of America that creates the frontier that will begin to kind of become the Western Wild West that we all kind of know and love. And so, like I said, the idea was to adjust the boundary line between Indian lands and the 13 colonies that had been set forth in the Royal Proclamation of 1763. The British Crown was hoping that a new boundary line might bring an end to the rampant frontier violence between Native Americans and American colonists by kind of pushing it back a little bit more, I believe. And the Native Americans hoped that a new permanent line might prevent further encroachment of their lands from the colonists. I wish I could tell those folks, spoiler alert, it will not. They will just keep pushing and pushing. And the final treaty was signed on November the 5th. With one signatory for each of the 6 nations in the presence of the representatives from colonies New Jersey, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, as well as Johnson. I think that they mentioned in this as well, because I think I've talked about the family of William Penn and his property in Pennsylvania, and the fact that this was also to stop the fighting between the Native Americans and the family of William Penn, because Pennsylvania itself was not even Pennsylvania yet. They were trying to get people to, they were trying to further up their, how can I put this? They were trying to shore up control of that area by getting them to sign this as well. It's, I don't know. Nothing feels good when you look back on these treaties and these agreements between the colonists and the Europeans and Native Americans. That we will not, for the record, we will not cover that much about it in this particular episode, but I do believe it will open up a whole nother thing. I would rather do an entire episode on Native Americans than just kind of fold them in here and be like, we talked about it, so that's just in case you're wondering, don't at me. And so like I said, so that would kind of create the first kind of idea of what the frontier, the real frontier would be, because up until that point, like we said, the frontier was basically anything outside of the towns and colonies that were made up the 13 colonies that ran down the Atlantic Ocean. That was the frontier. This kind of opens up and says, okay, the frontier is now all of that stuff out there, Ohio, moving on forward, even going down. And what we'll see, that what really makes the West what it is its distance from any sort of authority, its distance from any sort of real like law abiding or law like governing body. And that's what actually brings the West to an end. We'll find, I don't want to bury the lead here, is that basically once all these territories and areas declare statehood and now become a part of like the conglomerate, the machine that is America, they now have authority. There's now law enforcement agencies. It's not just some random guy with a badge who's trying his best to try to hold this town together when no one else really cares. You know, that's what you get in the late 1800s, what you get in the 1700s. But once we get to the 20th century, it kind of goes away. And I actually have, and I think we'll get to it, the last kind of, I have a timeline of like the beginning and the end of the West. And it's actually really interesting to see. We're going to get to a few more things here before we get to that, I believe. So the idea of like settling the frontier between like 1790 and 1820, the idea was to like grow the economy without draining like the skilled workers that were needed in the East to make whatever was needed out in the West. So like you have this like, you're trying to like, you know, balance of like how many people can we spare from the East to go try to settle the West. But if they leave and go to the West, there's nobody to make any of the tools and stuff that they will take with them to the West. But we'll see by the 1830s, however, the West was filling up with squatters who had no legal deed or right to the lands that they were kind of squatting over. Although they may have paid money to previous settlers, there was no actual legal agreements to kind of like hold that up to. And of course, people felt differently about this. There were some people who were like, you know, okay, well, they're out there. At least they're out there. Whether they legally, you know, procured the land or not, they're there, which kind of helps the whole cause, doesn't it? At least we have somebody from America out there, whether illegal or not. And then there are other people who are like, well, that's kind of wrong. It's like there's always two sides to every coin. Then we find what was called the Free Soil movement of the 1840s, which called for low-cost land for free white farmers in a position enacted into law by the new Republican Party in 1862, which offered 160 acres of homesteads to all adults, male and female, black and white, native-born, or immigrant. So there are a number of different ways they kind of opened up and tried to open up the land to people. I always think, I mean, just imagine, because this had to have happened. You can't tell me it didn't happen. I'm sure a lot of it is probably gone by now, but there had to be some families, because even if we're talking about 1830, 1840, that's less than 200 years from now, and we're talking probably 5 grandmas, maybe 5 grandmas, maybe 6 max, you know. So there had to be somebody who went out there, got some land in a way that they probably shouldn't have, and then kept passing it on down, and lo and behold, 200 years later, you have like some really, really lucrative like land that you can now do whatever with. I just feel like people act like that didn't happen, or like that just everyone just it's all been absolved or what. No, it's like people had that. And so now we will move from that to the idea of what a cowboy is. And I learned a couple things about that I think are worth sharing with you guys. And we're going to go from that to a quick timeline, and then we're going to talk about some Western movies as well as some famous Western cowboys, people like Wyatt Earp, Buffalo Bill, stuff like that, and kind of give you a little once-over for those guys. But yes, the idea of a cowboy comes from, it's basically a cowboy is an animal herder who tends cattle on ranches in North America, traditionally on horseback, and often performs a multitude of other ranch-related tasks. The historic American cowboy of the late 19th century arose from the term vaquero. It was the vaquero traditions of northern Mexico and became a figure of special significance and legend. What's wild about the word vaquero is that it is the foundation, the building blocks of the term buckaroo. I'll give you a second right there so you can just take that in. You know, take some deep breaths. I know I laid a lot on you just now. Buckaroo, vaquero. I never knew. And it makes so much sense, though, when you think about it. That's one of the few words in all this stuff that makes sense. It's like after like hundreds of years of saying vaquero, 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 buckaroo. We just get there, and it feels so right. And so the Spanish term vaquero is derived from vaca, which means cow, which came from the Latin word vaca. And cowboy was first used in print by a man named Jonathan Swift in 1725. And was used pretty commonly in the British Isles from 1820 to 1850 to describe young boys who tended who tended the family or community of cows that they had. So that's a little bit about cowboys. What we'll get to now are the 1800s, specifically the mid 1800s, around the 1860s. And I never knew this at all until I did this research. And I think it's alluded to throughout Westerns if you watch them, but I don't think it's really talked about that much, but how much the Civil War, how large of an effect the Civil War had on what we understand to be the American West. It essentially is the American. It is the catalyst that brought us towards everything we know and love about cowboys. And I did not know that. You know, you realize, I mean, obviously, and I was talking about this the other day with somebody about just all the repercussions that the Civil War brought, and how just there was so much that happened during that time that we're still recovering from as a nation. And how we may not be too far from another one just on the horizon. Who knows? But the West had been expanding since the Louisiana Purchase. But the era known as the Wild Wild West did not truly begin until after the Civil War. The Civil War changed everything in America. Everything. The South could no longer enslave human beings, and the soldiers returned from war to a much different way of life, which doesn't that always seem to be the case. So since, you know, slaves were kind of off the table, and we had taken all this land, you know, Native Americans kind of became the next target for conquest for expanding Americans. And wildly enough, and I think that they mentioned this as well, like a lot of outlaws in the Wild Wild West were actually Civil War veterans. And so I'll give you a quick timeline, and so you can kind of understand the Civil War's inclusion in all of this. So we got February 17th, 1865. Fort Buchanan is overrun and destroyed by Chiricahua warriors in Arizona, which was still a territory at the time. June 23rd, 1865, Stand Watie, a Cherokee cavalry commander in the Confederate Army, becomes the last Confederate general to surrender to Union forces at Dokesville, which is in Indian Territory. July 21st, 1865 is our last date from 1865. Wild Bill Hickok, which we'll talk about later, kills gambler Davis Tutt in a shootout in Springfield, Missouri. This is kind of what gives him that Wild Bill name. This is where people start talking about, yo, that Bill is a wild boy. So that was in 1865. 1866, Jesse and Frank James robbed their first bank in Liberty, Missouri. Of course, Jesse James fame. Spring of 1866, this period of great cattle drives begins when Texas ranchers drive more than 260,000 heads of cattle to assorted markets. December 21st, 1866, 80 soldiers led by Captain William J. Fetterman are ambushed and annihilated by Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors near Fort Phil Kearny, Wyoming. And I'm telling you all this, like I said, to kind of let you understand over the couple years how America shifted from, you know, we're leading up to the Civil War. Obviously, the frontier is still there. Obviously, everyone's leaving the colonies. Yeah, everyone's leaving the colonies to go and find what is this new part of America we all need to be at. But the interesting thing to me, I think, what the fabric that gets kind of sewn together is how the nation transitions from fighting about, oh, you know, we should have slaves, we should not have slaves, let's fight about it for like 5 years. And then after that, like, well, everybody kind of comes home and it's like, oh, we're not doing slaves anymore. Well, let's just go out to the West, and everybody, you know, the Indians out there are like, we don't really like that idea, so we're going to fight back. We'll start killing y'all. And they become the new target of kind of like American negativity. I don't know. It's just, I would have never thought that's how it would go. And what I see here, I didn't know this either, is that it says that while many settlers went west via wagon train, I feel like everyone knows about those covered wagons. A lot of people died doing that as well. What people did who had money, if you had a little cashola, you know, little Skrilla, right? You would hop on a ship, right? And that ship would go down to either Nicaragua or Panama, which we talked about the Panama Canal in previous episodes. And you would get that, well, the Panama Canal didn't exist at this point, but you would get to Panama and you would kind of go over some land, and then you would end up on the other side. You kind of go to the north on the Pacific side. That's another way. I didn't know that people were taking ships to get to the frontier. I didn't know that. That's news to me. Evidently, I think they said Mark Twain did this. Ulysses S. Grant also did it as well. But now that we've gotten past the whole idea of the beginning of the frontier kind of becoming America's main focus, we'll find ourselves in what is called the Golden Age of the West, which I didn't know such a thing existed. I did not. We talked about, I think 2 weeks ago with our last HDTH, was the Golden Age of piracy. And we find a lot of times with this stuff, you think, like, I thought that pirates were the same for, like, I don't know, all like 400 or 500 years or whatever, that you think all these movies come out. You think that everybody's Blackbeard, everybody's got a peg leg, everybody's, you know, yada yada whatever. When you find it all, like everything, which is not surprising, it evolves. It has to evolve. We find that, like I said in the previous HDTH, that piracy had been a thing for thousands of years. It only became what we know for it to be for the Pirates of the Caribbean, stuff like that, and Peter Pan. All that kind of takes place in like 150 to 200 year span. And the golden age of the Wild Wild West is even smaller. The golden age, I think I mentioned already, is about 30 to 45 years long. It goes from right after the Wild Wild West really right up to around 1890, because anything after that is like things have changed, but there's still a little bit of the old guard still hanging, but it's not anything like it was. 1890, things were still heavily Wild West, sort of kind of stationed and focused, but you end up going 20 years later and you got cars and stuff, and how are we gonna have cars and shootouts at the same time, or at least like Wild West shootouts? And so, like I said, the archetypical, I'm not sure. You can add me on that. Tell me how you pronounce that. The Old West period is often cited by historians to have occurred between the end of the American Civil War and the 1890 census. This period included historical events synonymous with the Old West or Wild West type of themes, such as violent conflict arising from encroaching civilization in frontier land, the removal and assimilation, I'm just throwing everything out today, and the assimilation of natives, consolidation of property to large corporations and government, vigilantism, and the attempted enforcement of laws upon outlaws. Colonization hit North American wildlife hard. Hunters killed tens of millions of wild buffalo that were sacred to many Indian tribes, and they served as sources of meat, skins, and other products, taking their number down to a few hundred. So they literally killed millions of these buffalo. Carnivores such as cougars and wolves were exterminated from many parts of the country. From the 1880s forward, the government set up national parks and natural reserves to around the West to kind of keep this from happening. But it's just wild to think that when you look at like the national parks that they have, that basically that's what the whole country looked like a couple hundred years ago. Think about that. A couple hundred years ago, the whole country was Yellowstone National Park. Well, not all of it, but more of it. Definitely more of it. And humans, we come in with our not even just humans. I mean, I guess Americans, Europeans, come in and just start just destruction, just destroying things. It's sad when you look back and just think about it. And so the last bit of the frontier that I'm really going to talk about before we get to like more specific things like my favorite Western movies and some famous cowboys is going to be the Spanish Empire, which I think does not get as much due as it should for its settling of the West, for the part that it played in creating America. I don't think we really think about how much the Spanish crown, how much we really are. And when you look at America, you can tell and kind of see. When you think about it, we were settled by what they say, the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, and the English. But it was the Spanish and the British who seemed to have had the largest fingerprint on this country. When you think of it, you can almost split it down the middle. And what's wild is that you have the English on the right, with the 13 colonies. You have the Spanish on the left with just like California, Mexico, Texas, and then you have like the French just running up the middle, just running up the middle, little ISO, right? It's wild when you think of it like that. But like I said, I don't think we think about how much Spain played a real large part. So the Spanish Empire claimed most of Western North America. Like I said, today's Mexico, California, New Mexico were all among the first parts of mainland North America to be settled by Europeans. When I read that, mind blown. Who knew? Spanish Mexico also included Texas, which I feel like they teach us a little bit of this stuff in school, but it just goes over your head, or I'm just too young to care about it. And so in the 1810s, the Napoleonic Wars set off an independence movement in Spanish colonies, and in 1821, the independent state of Mexico was created. But as the Mexican government had little authority in Texas, many slave-owning English-speaking settlers just kind of settled there in blatant violation of Mexican laws, knowing they couldn't be stopped. And the 1836 Texas Revolution led to an independent Republic of Texas, and that's we ended up taking that. But it's just wild to just see how the evolution of how things change. So then the United States annexation of Texas happened in 1845, and that sparked the 1846-1848 Mexican-American War, after which the United States established claims on Texas and annexed other southwestern territories. In the end, after that war, Mexico lost nearly half of its land. So that is kind of how we ended up with so many. Because I've always, when you look at, it's easy to look at and not understand. It's just why, I don't know, like all of the Southwest and a lot of the West everything is Spanish. Every town is Spanish. Everything is Spanish. And it's like, at first you want to be like, man, how'd all these, immigrants get here? And it's like, no, dude, they were here before America was America. Like this has been a Spanish colony, a Spanish part of the Spanish Empire for hundreds of years. It just only now is part of America. It makes more sense when you look at it that way. Then one more interesting thing that I found before we get to the next part of it is that what the reason that there are so many Indian reservations out towards the west, which I've always kind of wondered that too, because we have them here. We have a couple, but nothing compared to what they have out in like Arizona, New Mexico. Like, it's wild when you go out there just how much land in comparison. I mean, obviously they used to have it all, but they did that because back when they were first creating these Indian reservations, they saw that that land is like not having any real like resource value. There's nothing they couldn't take any raw materials from there and turn it into something. So they gave that land to those people because they saw no use for it, like economically. It's just like every stone you turn over, it's just another way of people just being mean to each other. It's kind of sad. But to brighten it up, we'll move on to another part of this podcast. I thought, since we're talking about westerns, I think what sparked my love, I guess if you will, for the West is growing up with parents who just love westerns, movies and TV shows. I grew up watching Gunsmoke, Bonanza. Gunsmoke was a big one. Matt Dillon, Festus, Doc, all those people. And there's a lot of good movies out there. So I was going to list a couple of them. I listed, like I said, Gunsmoke, Bonanza, Tombstone, which I think we even played a clip from that here. Love Tombstone. I went back and watched a little bit of it because we're doing the episode this week, and man, like honestly, when I finish this, I may go back and watch a couple of Clint Eastwood movies, like the westerns, because I like the Dirty Harry ones of his, and I like Clint Eastwood as an actor. I've just never really gone back that far to see the movie. I've always heard about it, but like some of those movies that I watched to kind of get a little bit of to kind of understand the Western vehicle, if you will, a little bit better, they were pretty good. It might be worth my time. But yeah, the Tombstone, the Wild Wild West, which I think was just a very instrumental in my growing up. It was just like that's to me is what I know to be the Wild West. Like I know there's other movies and there's other shows, but like that's what I grew up with. What else? Like I said, the Clint Eastwood movies, The Fistful of Dollars, A Few Dollars More. Was it? Yeah, there's so many of them. All right, and now we're going to talk about a couple famous cowboys in actual Wild West history. I, for whatever reason, thought all these guys were fake before I did the research. Not before I did the research here, but like growing up as a kid, I could not figure out where the Wild West fit in history because it doesn't get covered that much in like social studies and like stuff like that. There's not that many Wild West college classes out there, but like literally as a child, that's why it was so interesting for me to understand when the golden age of the Wild West was, and that it literally lasted for like 30 years. But it spawned, I mean, like legit an entire genre of like books and movies and television. I didn't know that. And so, yeah, the first guy we're gonna talk about is Wyatt Earp, because that's, he was the subject of the movie Tombstone. Really good movie. The guy really existed and really did a lot of the stuff they said he did. We'll find that is not always the case. So his full name, Wyatt Barry Stapp Earp. Wyatt Barry Stapp. You better not get old Barry Stapp mad. But yeah, Wyatt B.S.E. Wyatt Earp was born March 19, 1848, and he died January 13, 1929. He was an American lawman and gambler in the American West, lived in cities like Dodge City, Deadwood, and Tombstone. Honestly, did not know that Deadwood was a real town until this research, thought it was just made up for the television show. Who would live in a town called Deadwood? Who would live in a town called Dead Anything? But Earp was involved in the famous gunfight at the OK Corral, which, like, once again, don't want to keep being dead horse, did not know it was real. Wyatt is often depicted as a key figure in the shootout, but while this is usually the case, his brother Virgil was both a deputy U.S. Marshal and a Tombstone City Marshal, and had considerably more experience in law enforcement than his brother Wyatt did. But yeah, I mean, if you want to find out more about him, there's been countless movies made about him. The best one, as far as the most cinematic one, is definitely Tombstone. There's a biography, I think, of him, and it's wild. What's interesting about him is because he was real, first off, and he did the Wild West stuff, and then lived like solidly into like the 20th century, like lived past World War I, like lived until he died in 1929. So like he was a modern figure almost as much as he was like a Wild West legend. The next one we'll get to is Buffalo Bill, and this guy. There's a couple bills we're going to talk about. We'll talk about Buffalo Bill, and we will also cover Wild Bill. But Buffalo Bill, whose real name is William Frederick Cody, lived a life. Guy lived a life, and I will bury I'm not going to bury the lead right now. The man was awarded the Medal of Honor, and then they took it back. What kind of stuff is that? We'll get to that. So he was born in 1846, died in 1917. He was a bison hunter, showman, all that good stuff. He was born in Iowa Territory before it was the state of Iowa. He lived there for several years. Before that, or later on, he would live in Ontario for a little bit. Then come back to the Midwest and then live in the Kansas Territory. Once again, not a state. And that was another thing I think that really led to the debauchery that would just happen in these places, because like I said before, there was no real governing body to kind of stop people. None of these were states yet. They were just areas that America was kind of like holding on to, keeping an eye on with like one eye while they're doing the rest, making sure that New York's all right, and Pennsylvania and Delaware. I don't know why I chose Delaware. But he started, Buffalo Bill started working at the age of 11. His father died not too long before that. He was a rider on the Pony Express at age 15, doing some mail stuff. He would join the Civil War on the Union side and fought from 1863 to 1865. Later, he served as a civilian for the U.S. Army as a scout during the Indian Wars. And this is where he got the Medal of Honor. This is where they gave him the Medal of Honor. And this is also where it gets kind of foggy as to whether or not he was truly a soldier or not. Well, it's not foggy. It's known that he wasn't. But the idea is you're doing work on the behalf of the U.S. Army, and you did it so well that they gave you a Medal of Honor that you really shouldn't be able to take it back. So he got this in 1872. He's one of the most well-known figures in American Old West. I'm sure most people know Buffalo Bill, and he would actually start spreading his own word. He would do shows about himself, and cowboy themes and stuff that had to do with the frontier and Indian wars. And in 1883, he founded Buffalo Bill's Wild West, and he took his company on tours of the U.S. and Great Britain and even the continental Europe. So that may be why we all know Buffalo Bill so well. This dude literally was marketing himself as he was doing his Buffalo Bill antics. But like I said, he was given the award in 1772, and then it was revoked in 1917 when they made a new law that said anybody basically, if you were given the Medal of Honor, that you had to have been serving, literally sworn in as a soldier in the armed forces in order to receive one. And then when they did this, it literally took, because he wasn't the only one that they did this to. They took almost 1,000 medals back, which I think is crazy. I don't know. These people did stuff for the country that got us where we are. You can't just posthumously take the stuff back because you changed the rule now. Come on. I don't know. That just seems really messed up. But the cool thing about, if there is a silver lining, which people say there mostly is that he died the same year this happened, and he actually died a couple days before it even became a full, or I guess let me see. I think I have it here exactly what it's written so much about, or I have so much information about this guy. Let's see. Where's it at? Yeah, it says here that the law was enacted days before he would actually die. So he was in such, he didn't know that it had been taken from him. So he died still believing he was a Medal of Honor recipient, as he should have. It's really messed up. I think they actually ended up giving it back to him as well. So they just, the government's all Indian given. That's mean. I guess I shouldn't say that. But yeah, I thought they did. I guess they don't. I don't have evidence of them giving it back, but they definitely took it from him. And so we'll move on from that. The next bill we have is Wild Bill. His name is James Butler Hickok. It's a good name. I didn't think Hickok was a real last name. He was born in Illinois to a man named William Alonzo Hickok, who was an abolitionist, and his wife, Polly Butler. What I found interesting about a lot of these guys, these outlaws, oddly enough, I don't know why you would think, a lot of them had fought for the northern side. Like they said, a lot of outlaws were Civil War veterans. I'm sure there were Confederate ones, I'm not saying it all, but the ones that we know were actually, Union sympathizers. I find that I wouldn't have found that. Thought I would have found that. But yeah, he's of English ancestry. He was the fourth of 6 children. Their house was actually said to be a part of the Underground Railroad before all this Wild West stuff started happening. But his father died in 1852, far before the Civil War would even happen. In 1855, at age 18, James Hickok fled Illinois after a fight with Charles Hudson, during which both fell into a canal. Each thought that they both had killed the other one. Wow, that's why you don't get in fights, guys, because you might accidentally think that you killed the guy and then you're on the run. He moved from there to Leavenworth, Kansas, where he joined Jim Lane's Free State Army, also known as the Jayhawkers. It's a cool name. They were an anti-slavery vigilante group active in the new territory during the Bleeding Kansas era, which I don't even know what that is. Let's click on that. So Bleeding Kansas was a series of violent civil confrontations in the Kansas Territory that led, and to a lesser extent in western Missouri between 1854 and 1859. It emerged from a political and ideological debate over the legality of slavery and the proposed state of Kansas. So that is what Bleeding Kansas is. It sounds like the greatest new Netflix show. Have you watched Bleeding Kansas? You know, coming to a screen near you. Let's see, but back to it. I don't know if there's much else to say about him. I thought it was cool that he got a Medal of Honor. You know, and these guys were just known for, like, us just being outlaws. You know, I don't have much of his antics, really, the stuff that he did. He was always, you know, getting in fights and doing cowboy stuff. But I don't, you know, I realized, I think, why we really know him is, like I said, he was we're not, no, this is different, not Buffalo Bill. Well, I'm not sure why we know Wild Bill. Truthfully, I don't know. To be honest with you. But yeah, that's all the ones I got for that. What I do have is one more thing before we get out of here. I think there's one more. Let me check, kind of go to the end here. That, and I have the ending timeline for you of how the West ended. So one more thing, and then we're going to talk about how the West actually ended. But what I found, what I think, and I used to have a segment of this podcast called Things I Didn't Know Before, and I think this would have been a prime piece of topic, a little bit of content for that segment. But what I found out is that Utah also wasn't a part of America. Was, you know, it didn't just become America. It didn't grow up inside of America, if you will, if that makes any sense at all. It was part of California. It was part of a place called Alta, California. It wasn't like that. I don't think it was the same California that is part of Mexico. I'm not 100% sure, but it's like America went to war with the territory of Utah in like 1857. It's called the Utah War. I just saw it, like, when I was looking stuff up. They were like some, you know, in the Utah War, and I was like, wait, what's the Utah War? Because that phrase just implies that there was a war in Utah, and I've never heard of it. And it's literally America fighting the Mormons, and like, it doesn't actually come. It's called a war. I guess some stuff went down, but I don't think it's a war in the quite simple way that we think of it. Yeah. So what I have here, it says, basically, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, known as the Mormons, or LDS, were fearful that the large U.S. military force had been sent to annihilate them, and having faced persecution in other areas, they made preparations for their defense. So what I didn't realize is that, and this is why Utah is the way it is, the Mormons left America to have religious freedom in Utah, which is, it's ironic because then they would end up becoming a part of America. But they did this just the same way that the Protestants left, you know, England, or not England, but like Europe as a whole, for religious freedom. The same reason that a lot of cultures flee their land is because of religious persecution. This is what they thought was going to happen again, even though they weren't at the time a full state of America. But like, and then so it says here, so the bloodshed was to be avoided, and the U.S. government also hoped that the purpose might be attained without loss of life. So both sides prepared for war. The Mormons manufactured or repaired firearms, turned their sights into bayonets. Oh my gosh! And then burnished and sharpened long unused sabers. These guys are getting ready to go. And rather than engaging the army directly, this is what's wild. The Mormon strategy was one of hindering and weakening. Right. So Daniel H. Wells, Lieutenant General of the Nauvoo Legion, instructed Major Joseph Taylor on ascertaining the locality of the route of the troops. Proceed at once to annoy them in every possible way. Use every exertion to stampede their animals and set fire to their trains. Let me read that again. Set fire to their trains. They want to burn the whole country before them and on their flanks too. They want to keep them from sleeping by night surprises. They want to blockade the road by felling trees or destroying the river fords wherever they can. These guys are just throwing things, just burning stuff. But it's crazy. I don't think this was in my textbook at all, that America straight went to war with Utah and then made the mistake. This is all happening on the contingent in America. I wonder how many other territory wars America's gotten into that are just hidden in the bowels of Wikipedia. So I'm getting this all from Wikipedia. They would watch for opportunities to set fire to the grass, leave no grass before them unburned. So the Mormons, they blocked the army's entrance into Salt Lake Valley, weaken the U.S. Army by hindering them from receiving provisions because they're burning the crap out of their trains. And so the confrontation between the two of them. So the Mormons' army was called the Nauvoo Legion. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. Nauvoo. Nauvoo Legion. I mean, how else would you pronounce it? But the confrontation between them and the U.S. involved destruction of property, a couple brief skirmishes in what is today southwestern Wyoming, but no actual battles happened. That's why they say it's not the actual war like you think of it. Okay, yeah, and I do have a little bit of information. I do have a little bit of information on kind of how, because this is what was crazy to me. Like, because I've never understood why Utah is the way it is, and I don't mean that in any sort of way. I just mean the fact that they've kind of, not the whole state, but the whole state seems to kind of feel the same way about Mormons, like they're down, like they're in with it. You know what I mean? And there's that really, you don't find that in any other state in America. But you find that it's because they went there and kind of made it their own because they were getting pushed out. So like the Mormons first started settling in Utah in like 1847, specifically, I guess, in the summer of 1847, the summer of 47. Mormon pioneers, they began leaving the U.S. for Utah after a bunch of conflicts kind of happened in Missouri and Illinois, some resulting in the death of some people, specifically Joseph Smith Jr., who was the founder of LDS. Brigham Young and other LDS church leaders believed that the isolation of Utah would secure the rights of Mormons and would ensure the free practice of their religion. Like I said, they were fleeing quote-unquote religious persecution. And although the U.S. had gained control of settled parts of Alta California and Nuevo Mexico in 1846, the LDS church members still understood that they were not actually leaving the political orbit of the United States, but it says in here they didn't really want to. But what they were trying to do, they wanted to make their own state, and it wasn't going to be called Utah. It was going to be called the State of Deseret, and that was the proposed state that they proposed to America in 1849 once they had left like Missouri and Illinois and moved to Utah. But it wasn't Utah; it was going to be the State of Deseret. And then what's kind of actually, it existed for a second, but never actually recognized by the federal government. It existed for a couple years. They even sent a guy to D.C. to like lobby for them. His name was John Milton Bernhizel. But yeah, okay. So that was just, you know, I learned and I share with you. Who knew that America was fighting Utah people? What do you call people from Utah? Utes, maybe Utes. I don't know. But yeah, the last thing I got for you is just this quick timeline of how the West ended. People always want to know how the West was won. It was won by just America becoming more of America. And so basically we'll see here, like I said, it starts to kind of end in 1907 or in the early 1900s. In 1907, Oklahoma becomes the 46th state in the Union. So like I said, the more that these states, more of these territories and kind of ruled areas kind of form up and become states, there's less kind of crazy stuff for these outlaws to get into and do. The next year, 1908, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid are reportedly found dead following a shootout with the police in a town in Bolivia. Basically, we entered the 1910s at that point. The era of the Wild West was over. A few things still were hanging around. The last stagecoach robbery actually occurred, but with the modernization of law enforcement, the age of the outlaw was pretty much over. By the end of the decade, America had kind of seen themselves go from a nation kind of that was still kind of prone to isolation to kind of go from a up-and-coming global power. This was all helped or done by World War I. We fought in that, and that kind of created the League of Nations, so on and so forth. Then you would see Prohibition come, and you know there's an increase. More cities become modernized, and that would usher in a time of national prosperity known as the Roaring Twenties. But the last couple things of the West, 1912, New Mexico becomes the next state. Same year, Arizona comes in. Same year, Alaska becomes the territory of Alaska. Would later come in as the 49th state in 1959. Let's see. Yeah, so we have this is the last. Can you imagine the last stagecoach robbery? If you had to guess, take a guess before I tell you. Just pause. Right? That was your guess. It was December the 5th, 1916 was the last time a stagecoach got robbed. And this happened in Jarbidge Canyon, Nevada, and 3 robbers rolled up on this U.S. Post Office Department stagecoach, shot the driver, and stole $4,000 in cash. And they were caught very soon afterwards. This is not 1865, man. It's 1916. People straight up have cars. All right, that's been another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. This was episode 71, I do believe. We talked about the Wild West, how the West was settled. I even tell you how it ended. Told you about the last stagecoach robbery there ever was. We talked about a couple different guys, a couple different bills, and a Wyatt, I do believe. Very interesting stuff, I do believe. If you love what you just heard here, as always, there's more where that came from over at hcthappen.com. As always, there's a written version of what you found, as well as photos and videos that I've been putting on the works cited that you'll definitely find. That just kind of shows you where I get all my stuff from. As always, like and subscribe wherever you find this. Give us 5 stars if you'd like to. It really helps the pod grow. If you don't want to give us 5 stars, give us 2 stars and say, well, you didn't want to give us 5 stars, because constructive criticism is always welcome. And I'm not sure if there's much else to tell you guys today. As always, I appreciate those that come back from week to week and press play. This is a little bit of a longer one, but this is kind of hopefully where the pod is going. And we're going to keep going. We're going to tackle some more difficult topics as things go on. I think one thing I definitely even want to get into, I'll even tell you guys, is I want to dive into all of the crown jewels from the British Empire. I do. It's something that's been on my how did that happen bucket list, if you will. I want to find out the stories. I found a couple. I found out a couple, and they're just mind blowing. So they have so much. When I was watching the King's coronation recently, and it just always jogs your memory and makes you think about all the messed up stuff they've done, even though they try to make you forget or help you forget. But that's just an idea of where the pod's going. That definitely won't be next week, but we've got some stuff coming down the pike for you guys. But yeah, always thank you for press and play. We'll see you next week with the next Bite Test Bio.